there's all of these tools out there that can really make, not only is it just about reducing what you have, but some possibilities are out there, some things that were not necessarily thought of as possible before, because it's going to take too much money, too much water, too much this. Suddenly, with this kind of technology, you could save water and have what you want. You can save money and have what an organization would like.
Hi, everyone. I'm John Fiella, and welcome to another episode of the Golf Sustainability Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Matt Muhlenbruch, who's the Director of Agronomy at Hillcrest Country Club. He's joining us on the show today for what I know will be a very interesting conversation based on the fact that Matt's got over 20 years of experience as a superintendent at courses in California. Matt, welcome to the podcast, and thanks very much for joining me today.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Super. Well, you've got really deep and rich experience. Maybe we should start by having you tell us about your career journey and your current role at Hillcrest Country Club.
Sure. Well, I've been on a golf course as long as I can remember, but I won't bore you with too much of it. Grew up on the East Coast in New Jersey, where I started working summers on a golf course, just like a lot of people in this industry. Wound up in college at Penn State, and then after graduation, kind of off to the races. Was briefly on a construction immediately after college in New Jersey, and did a stop in the Mid-Atlantic for just over 2 years. Learned some just incredible time that I was there, and it wasn't very long, but it was one of the more meaningful experiences in my grass growing career anyway. And then moved to the West Coast. I had an internship in college in California and kind of really fell in love with it and felt at home as soon as I got here. So I've been from North, Central, and now I'm down in LA. When I first moved out here to the West Coast, I was in the San Francisco Bay Area at Cal Club for a bit, and then I really spent I'd been bouncing around a little bit, and then I was at the Olympic Club for 7 years, almost 8 years, and had a great experience there. Loved living in San Francisco at the time. It was a really incredible time to be there, and we hosted the U.S. Open and U.S. Amateur, rebuilt 2 golf courses, so it was a kind of like dog years, right? You had all this experience and time compressed into in what seemingly the days were long, but the years were short, as they say. Then it was, my career took me to the Pebble Beach area, where we renovated and rebuilt, did the grow in and managed Poppy Hills for roughly 5 years, and kind of had our fill of that area, and decided when an opportunity presented itself in Los Angeles, my family and I moved down here for a major renovation of this property, and I've been here for 5 years running it, and really, really enjoy the club and Los Angeles a little bit more than I actually thought I would, having spent so much time in NorCal. But yeah, LA's been great to me and my family.
Yeah, that's super. Well, it sounds like you've got an appetite for tackling challenges, because redoing courses is never an easy task. And you've been associated with some pretty prestigious courses. I mean, several of those you mentioned are World Top 100 courses.
Sure. I do love a challenge. And, the construction phase of this is something that is that I absolutely really love. And towards the end of every project, I consistently say that I'm never doing that again. And we've done a few of them by now. But it's been, it's a unique piece of the business that I'm drawn to. I thoroughly enjoy it. And this particular property was the biggest challenge that I've ever had agronomically, and just the expectations of the Los Angeles area are very high, major market. The agronomic situation here, which we can go into later, is challenging. You have a lot of regulations in Southern California pertaining to water and those types of things. So it was just a lot to navigate, and it it continues to challenge. These challenges never go away, especially with the grow in, right? Like, it's really like more like it. What should take 2 years seems to take a decade, but it feels like it should only take 2 years. But yeah, this is it's certainly an area and a place that is challenging, and I enjoy it. Doing grow-ins is great, but it is a very stressful, time-consuming, life-consuming effort to go through. But it's really a satisfying when it's all finished.
Yeah, well, listen, you're clearly good at it, and you've introduced a couple topics that I can't wait to get into in detail. But before we do that, for those of our listeners that may not be too familiar with Hillcrest Country Club, why don't you briefly tell us about the club?
Oh, sure. So Hillcrest Country Club was founded in 1920, so just over 100 years old at this point, and it was on the west side of Los Angeles when there was nothing on the west side of Los Angeles except for a couple of golf courses and some oil derricks and racetrack, some old pictures we saw. But it was really started as it has a great history of philanthropic activities in the city. So it was really very much a businessmen's organization established in that thread of philanthropy in the business community. So that being said, it's got a little bit different feel to it, right? The membership is made up of not just avid golfers and people who want to just consume the club. There's certain aspects of that philanthropy piece of it that are required to be a member of Hillcrest. So it has just a slightly different feel than any other club that I've been at, which in a good way or just in a unique way. So, and golf wasn't always a huge priority here. The history's gone up and down in its priority, but it was particularly its core is that philanthropic activity and the kind of club with a heart, so to speak, as it's been known, or it's been written about in a few publications. And so that kind of ties into some of the things that I, as a superintendent or director of agronomy, think that, golf is trying to move in. So having a membership that's, thinks beyond just the immediate round that needs to be played or wants to be played. I think it's been well received. A lot of these things that we've discussed about moving the property forward in a manageable, sustainable way. And it just feeds into that whole thread of it. And you have a lot of very successful people who are members here that really love the idea and want to go big with it. And it's, we've got some great plans and things like that for the club to move forward in that direction.
That's great. Well, that history and that characteristic of a kind of commitment to philanthropy it seems like is in the DNA of the club really feeds right into being conscious and aware of the environment and sustainability as you mentioned. So with that said, what does golf sustainability mean at Hillcrest Country Club?
So, I mean, it's funny to say that because I think that for the most part, we speak about it as people who are involved in the greater golf community, but I don't know how much clubs or golfers themselves know it. I think there's assumptions that it's like, okay, so we want to be more environmentally friendly. And it's not just that. Sustainability is not just that to me. I mean, that's a piece of it. But anybody who was in the golf business between the years of 2008 and 2012, you realize that you need to be economically sustainable as well. So, and they go hand in hand. And when you're talking about a business that is heavily reliant on natural resources, you're very dependent on what your local region gives you. If you're in a very wet area, your concern is going to be more hot and humid areas. You're going to be dealing with greater severity of pests. And so sustainability just looks different on a local level in golf. So it's hard to get a universal sustainability in golf is this, right? So, and build these cultures. So it's very much a discussion about natural resources, and the one commonality in sustainability is economically, right? Everybody has to be able to, costs can't just keep rising. People have to be able, some of these places still need to be they need to be open, right? I mean, you have municipalities, you have private clubs, but majority of golf courses are public, and there's so keeping people in the game and keeping these institutions viable is a part of sustainability. And now when you're talking about the environmental piece of it, all of those are cost centers, water, chemical, fertilizer, all of those things. So when you're talking about how to better manage those inputs, you can have real cost savings. Labor is included in that. And depending on how all of those are managed and which pieces of modern technology are coming out that you can better manage those and be more efficient, that's what's going to really kind of, I think, make golf more sustainable. Right. I mean, we could talk about switching grasses and doing these things, but there's always you're always going to need, to have anything, you're growing anything, you need, right, sun, soil and water, as they say, or air, light, and water is the common thing in turf school, right? So having that, you need to make sure that if you're talking about a universal, what is golf sustainability, it's going to universally, that has to be economically viable. And then on a local level is where you're going to find how you manage your resources.
Yeah. Well, that issue of economic sustainability at the end of the day is what it's all about. And your reference to 08 to 12 really kind of resonate, because the golf industry went through quite a rough patch there. Now, and I know in California, right, it's a unique environment, because it's an intense regulatory environment. What are some of the unique issues that you face in California in dealing with and addressing the stringent regulations there around managing golf courses?
Well, the single biggest input that anybody puts on a golf course west of the Mississippi is water. So that's your biggest one, and that's heavily regulated in the West. Not just California, everywhere there's different layers of control, and I mean we could have 10 podcasts about California's governance of water, but it's heavily regulated. And as I'm learning, this area in Southern California it's mostly imported, and so it really does have in a place that doesn't have rain, it doesn't have water, there does need to be regulation to make sure that there's the city stays viable, that it can grow, it can develop housing for people who eventually play golf and all of those things. So as far as on the priority list of these resources, golf isn't nearly as important as, again, the economics that others need water for more economically viable things. Not to say that golf isn't a big economic driver in the state or in the Southern California region. It's just not going to win a discussion when we're talking about residents drinking water versus fairway water, right? So the big discussion around the regulation of that is, how much does each entity get? What about the groundwater, which is really in its infancy in regulation, groundwater in the state, because that's more of a state. Water is heavily regulated on a local level. That's really who regulates majority of the water, is a very local level. And then now they're bringing in a state layer of this for groundwater sustainability agencies. And then layer upon layer upon layer. But so it makes it very challenging in terms of trying to get the message out that, you're trying to do what's right for your organization, whether it's a public golf course, municipality. In terms of water, you have to really be a part of the conversation, and there's a seat at the table for all of these landscapes and golf courses. Large landscapes and golf courses is what it's referred to as locally. So there's a seat at the table, and generally you have to know the position you're in at that table is that you're a large user, and it's not necessarily essential to. So in drought response, there's heavier restrictions and things like that on golf. So those regulations, they benefit everybody, but they certainly make it challenging for the golf courses. And what you really want to do is just find alternative sources, reclaimed. And I'd have to say that LA is a bit behind on that. But what they're really trying to do is, and this is all on the LADWP and any of the other websites for the public water, is that they're really researching on all reclaimed water, all water eventually being returned to the water supply in some way. So putting massive infrastructure into a city for reclaimed water for landscapes and large landscapes and golf courses, I think those resources are getting redirected towards how do we capture all the water and make it viable as one water, not different tiers of processed water. So those are some of the regulatory and projects that are coming up in these areas that so you have to remember, as you put the other thing with the water is it varies in quality. There's potable, and then there's groundwater that has all kinds of different constituents in it. And a lot of these regulations, when we talk about them, especially in terms of water, California has a history from some ag runoff that has made aquifers really polluted, right? So there's a lot of that in the state. So that didn't come from just somebody wanting to give somebody a hard time. There's history of especially in a state that doesn't get a lot of rainfall, when you have sources of water suddenly not viable for drinking, that's a problem. That causes for regulation. And some of California does love to adapt regulations, but the one that I have to say that am a fan of is the small engine. Like leaf blowers have all been regulated to go to electric. And, now that we've made, 90% of our stuff has gone electric. We live in a neighborhood. So like there's a lot of residents around. So not hearing a backpack blower has been actually a pleasant surprise, because when you do hear it, it is loud and obnoxious. It's kind of like, I'm going to show my age now, is when they banned smoking in bars and restaurants. You don't realize it until you're like, man, that's a lot better without it.
Yeah.
So anyway, like the regulatory environment here. It has a reputation of being too much or just aggressive, but I don't know too many other places that haven't followed suit, or at least a percentage of it, to some of the other states. But there's a lot of people here as well, so it's not the same boat when you're living in. There's a lot more liabilities, a lot more people around that you have to kind of manage some of this stuff around.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's yes, it's an intense regulatory environment, but it's not without purpose. I mean, there's good rationale behind a lot of it, probably most of it. And as you and I talked earlier, I think from a regulatory standpoint, kind of Europe tends to be very intense, and issues gravitate from Europe to California. And then, as you said, often the issues that are addressed in California wind up being addressed in other parts of the country, because it makes sense. So I think that there's kind of real value in understanding the challenges associated with that, because before you know it, these regulations may be coming to a state near you.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, but those regulations, I think, force innovation, right? And I was so impressed. We first met at the GCSAA event in California, in Phoenix, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
And you did a great presentation on the impact that technology was having on sustainability. And you've been actively engaged with a number of innovations. I'd really like you to give you an opportunity to talk about some of the recent sustainability projects that you've engaged in at Hillcrest Country Club, and maybe talk about some of the things you referenced at GCSAA, or there may be others that you prefer to address here?
Sure. So we discussed, as I mentioned before, water is the biggest natural resource we consume, and it's really heavily regulated. So, and not only that, it has the most dramatic effect on the rest of the operation. Right? Overwatering, you can wind up with too much disease, and underwatering, you obviously wind up with wilt, and then the playing conditions ultimately are what you're trying to deliver. That's the deliverable in your business, right? When people go out and play golf, they want to see and it to play and look a certain way. So we focused on water for all of those things. And when I was in, I went to business school at some point when I was in San Francisco, and I had this class in sustainability in business. And this professor always said, he's like, if you lead with sustainability, it's not gonna make sense. So when your focus is to deliver, in my case, uniformity in playing conditions, because we had after the construction, we have marbled soils, and it's and a lot of elevation change. So getting uniformity out of the irrigation was a challenge. And so what ultimately happened is once we went through the process with Toro and the precision sense and started to irrigate based on volumetric water content and getting an analysis of the property, so we knew where to put water and when. To simplify it, that ultimately gave us better uniformity. Ultimately used less water. Ultimately didn't require us putting in drain pipe everywhere because there was a wet spot. And you have to remember too, when you have wet spots all over the fairway, there's certain causes of those things, but generally we control the water in California, in Southern California. You don't have a lot of rain. So that being said, it was really one of those surprising tools that said, okay, the benefit of this analysis and the benefit of irrigating like this was universally better for all of these things, right? So we had problematic areas with disease. As we dried them out, that became better. The uniformity and the appearance of the golf course was better for the membership. The playability was better. And we used less resources across the board once we had properly managed the irrigation. So part of this is finding that kind of linchpin, so to speak, or that one thing that kind of affects everything else. And that was, and I say this casually, but this took a long time to get. It wasn't, we did an analysis, and I would say that it got us about 80% of the way there. And then it was really like anyone in charge of any of these properties, you have to know your property, right? You get to know these things. And then on top of that, we utilized, once we were programming and irrigating based on these management zones or really is what we call them. Then we started to drop soil sensors in there. So then we would measure our volumetric water content in each of these specific zones that was established by this precision sense. So you knew which areas and which program to run when it was kind of at its threshold, right? Like when you needed to irrigate and how much. So it really just gave us a lot better control and a lot more data. So when our decision making was very precise, what and how much we could run before we got too wet or it wasn't enough, and then we found ourselves chasing it a little bit. So it has been invaluable on the irrigation side. With those two things, the precision sense, the soil sensors, and Rainbird was with us the whole way as well. And it was one of my bigger accomplishments was using a Toro product and a Rainbird system and getting everybody to talk. It's just under the to get everybody to show their product and how well they could save water. So it was actually pretty good. It was great. I mean, we also had a great irrigation designer in Brent Harvey, and it was from the beginning of this project, water was a focus, right? And it was, so when you, in the discussions with the irrigation designer, the irrigation provider, right? The manufacturer of Rainbird, and then the other sides of these things, the people with soil sensors and widgets and all these other things. And technology, honestly, like there's a lot of soil sensors out there right now, and who knows what it's going to look like in 5 years, because it's proven that it's a worthwhile investment to understand what's going on in the property from a lot of different perspectives. Excuse me, but I try to kind of stick with one thing, pick something we like that my team and I say, okay, this is the sensor for us. We're going to stick with this for a little while. What I don't like to do with technology, because there's a lot of it out there, is be managing a new technology every 3 weeks, right? Trying to adopt everything. It has to have meaningful, measurable advantages to the operation. Otherwise, you spend your time and your assistants and your management team is learning new software every 3 weeks, but I mean, I'm off on a tangent now, but but we started out on this technology with water. And then prior to that, prior to my experience here at Hillcrest, I had the we had the GPS sprayers, the John Deere GPS spray rigs at Poppy Hills, which is a real game changer on, you're talking about your fertilizer and chemical applications in the exact thing. It's almost scary how exact you can see these sprayers and individual nozzle control and the reduction in your fertilizer and plant protectants and all of these pest controls that were an immediate savings. So that was incredible. So we've heavily invested in those types of technologies on Hillcrest. And I know since I've left Poppy Hills, they've done the same. But we also have a very unique grassing plan where we have warm season fairways and Bermuda grass and ryegrass rough. So these have very different pest and fertility needs. So one can be detrimental to the other. So you need that kind of precision to make sure you're not causing more and more problems, with this sort of grassing plan. Again, I said this is a very challenging property to work, but there's all of these tools out there that can really make, not only is it just about reducing what you have, but some possibilities are out there, some things that were not necessarily thought of as possible before, because it's going to take too much money, too much water, too much this. Suddenly, with this kind of technology, you could save water and have what you want. You can save money and have what an organization would like. So the sprayers we utilize them. We have 4 of them at the property, and it is, it was a game changer the first time I saw it. So we invested in those fairly quickly. And during this renovation, it was a kind of a rebirth of the golf course. It was a fence line to fence line operation. So they had really reorged the whole department, and that's what I came in to do. Hired some assistants, we've made, I don't even know how many people we've hired, but it was getting a lot of people on the site and on board with what we were doing, because it's not typical, right? And the 2 people that were with me at the GCSA conference was Laura Beth Catterson, who's now with Syngenta, and Alex Opgenorth, who's with Greensight. Both of them were my assistants during.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
I didn't know
so
that.
they moved on to like technology companies, or at least sectors of Greensight is the drone company that we use to fly and get thermal images of the golf course every day to make irrigation decisions. So he went and worked. He's working with them now and just doing great. They also are the ones who distribute the Husqvarna robotic mowers, which we have some of those, and I'll get into that a little bit. So and Laura Beth really grabbed onto this. She was here before Alex was, and the 2 of them were great. And then I lost them to the to the companies that we were working with. But and they still come by and give us the special treatment. But part of that also is, there is a demand for knowledgeable, open-minded assistant superintendents who want to do something different, right? And that's kind of what I try to preach to what we do here is different, and it's not necessarily just about being environmentally friendly. Like, all of these things deliver a better product. They help you. And that's kind of the way that all of this is going. It feels very much, and obviously I'm not that old, but when you hear about these big changes in any industry, it's like going from night waterman to an automated irrigation system, right? I mean, we're going to see more and more of that with robotic mowers, with, obviously robotic mowers, GPS sprayers, like all of that is a big game changer on how golf courses is going to be managed in the next 10 years.
Yeah. Well, I do want to spend a couple more minutes on this because this is such a great topic. And boy, your enthusiasm and energy for deploying new technologies is readily apparent. So did you have an advantage with the renovation to be able to install these new technologies? Or, be it the precision sense system, be it the sensors, be it the new Rainbird?
So, having a new irrigation system is key. You're not dealing with a lot of the inefficiencies of old irrigation system, old pipe heads that have been in the ground, and you have built-in efficiencies with brand new, right? So everything is your rotors turn when they're like at a precise rate, or the gearing's not worn out. All of those things make it. It's just one less thing to deal with, right? I mean, new also gives you different issues. You don't have any. It's all standard out of the box, and this is irrigating a golf course is a very, very customized thing. So you have to spend your time on that, but you're not dealing with hardware necessarily like you would be on a 20-year-old irrigation system. The precision sense we did at Poppy Hills, that's where I was first exposed to that. And we irrigated very similar to how we were here, which was funny because that was a sand-capped golf course. So what we found there was that your water usage your overwatering could be masked because you're on a very firm surface, right? Your playing conditions still are that firm and fast. You're not getting a lot of wet spots because you're on a sand base. So what we found because we also used sensors there, was that in certain areas of the golf course, when we would run, we'll call it 0.2 of an inch, the sensor depicted that no matter if we ran 0.2 or we ran 0.15, we wound up in the same volumetric water content lasting the same amount of time, right? So you weren't getting wet, as in it would be an indicator of overwatering on the fairways because of the soil medium. But the sensors, so then we started to back those areas off and run less depth, but the frequency never changed. So it's all of these incremental tiny savings that, again, we didn't even realize until we really started looking at sensor data, that here's the opportunities, because the playing conditions never changed, right? And you're often listening to, as all of the superintendents I ever worked for were like, it's always talking to you, Matt. It's always talking to you. So it's, so there's a little bit more to it, right, than that. And I think that's where I really saw the benefit in the whole thing. And then I came to Hillcrest, and it wasn't a uniform growing medium like sand. It was marble cake all over the soil. So that is where we started to say, all right, that's where we went more on the uniformity in the irrigation application, and then kind of started. It's something that you're always going to be messing with, especially with water.
Yeah.
Here,
there is there's so much I'd like to get into here because I'm fascinated by this. And one of the people I met in Phoenix at the GCSAA show, his point of view was, at so many courses, irrigation is happening today the way it did 50 years ago. And he thinks that a real revolution in irrigation is needed over the next 10, 15 years to really get us to where we need to be in efficient water use. And I think it sounds like kind of you're there, and I'd love to get into it in more detail, but if we do, we're going to run out of time. So you touched on how you got Rainbird and Toro to collaborate. And I know how tough that is. It's I don't want to say it's quite like getting Coke and Pepsi to play nice together, but it's close. Partnerships. I like to say sustainability is a team sport. And tell us about kind of how you think about partnerships in achieving your sustainability goals. What are some of the key partnerships you have, and kind of what's your point of view
sure.
on the importance of partnerships?
I mean, obviously it's essential to have a good partnership and a good working relationship with all of your vendors, and I think that when you're talking about it with these vendors, they're especially locally, they know what regulations are. And, even when you're talking to your local fertilizer reps, they know what what you can do and you can't do. They know how to kind of give you those answers and help on that. And it's like anything, like when you have a lot of people pulling for you and if you're excited about something, generally those around you are going to say, all right, let's do this too. Any good idea such as sustainability and the benefit has to be it's mutually beneficial. So when you go to a property, when you have the Toro Precision Sense, which is their product, and then you have Rainbird, when ultimately they don't even, either side could say our product helped Hillcrest save water. Well, there's a brilliant for everybody. They don't have to say, they have a Rainbird system. They just say right. Like, so when you find that universal and that common thread that's going to benefit everybody, it makes it very obvious and very easy. And also, utilizing our irrigation designer to help as well, Brett Harvey, and the relationships he's established with those companies. And I had a stronger relationship with Toro and the engineering team there from Poppy Hills. And then Brett Harvey really brought some of those relationships from Rainbird, where we kind of came together and really developed these types of things. So it's funny when you start to invite more and more people to the party, and we're flying drones and all of these soil sensors, and that's when everything starts getting a little sticky. You have the two big guys in the room, right? There's only really there's two major suppliers but there's a lot of little guys with different technologies that I think that some of these companies, the Rainbirds and Toros, are still figuring out how to they see the value in it, but which brand, what's most beneficial, right? So they're going to be slower to adapt that technology because they're just so much bigger. Like, I can buy 25 sensors. They're talking about partnerships that are global. So which can get frustrating for somebody or myself and some of the assistants that have been here that are like, why doesn't Rainbird just do it? It's like, well, they're a multinational company. It's just not going to happen overnight, but the fact is that they pick up the phone when we call because they know we have something, we're excited about it and we're working towards something. So having those established positive relationships with these companies is it's the only way you're really going to get it done. It has to be a partnership at this time. And you have to also be ready to be, none of it's turnkey. If you're going to be first, as they say, never be the first to do anything, right? Like you can, as you are the first to do something, you have to understand that some of these companies don't even know how to use this in an application. They're looking for the data. A lot of these companies are looking for the participation from superintendents and clubs to see, how do we best utilize our product? Right. And I think that's the part of it you have to remember when you sign up or you purchase something in a newly innovative environment. You're a little bit of a guinea pig. So you need to have some patience and work with it. It's not turnkey, because when you start to do these things differently and you call support and they're like, well, nobody's asked for that. Or, I don't know how many times that Laura Beth or Alex would call one of the vendors and they're like, oh, you guys again? One of those. Not that there was problems with any of the equipment, but we're just the innovation's just been fun over the last 5 years to work with. But it's also kind of, it could be exhausting when you are looking for support, and it's kind of not that you're saying that we're on our own is a everybody's trying to figure it out. So you need to make sure you have that team atmosphere and that that mentality and trust your vendors that they have your best interest. Probably not going to be on your timeline, but they're working towards the same thing. I mean, they obviously want to sell more sensors and all it to work in a unique way.
Well, I think it's very cool, Matt, how you got a constellation of suppliers to come together for a solution. And in my point of view, that's really what's going to be necessary to advance the industry, because these isolated systems and, there's got to be some interoperability. There's got to be a way to kind of plug and play different modules or components to help courses achieve their goals.
And that's one of the things that you have to really pay attention to as well, is who are your vendor partners? Are they going to go with a certain brand of soil sensor, and that's going to really integrate the best with that? Then inevitably you're going to have to start to go that direction. Right now, there's a lot out there, and as these things get integrated into your central computer, that's who's going to be left on the soil sensor technology and suppliers for golf. I don't think that unless there's an open platform from one of the companies that just says, hey, any sensor that you have, then how are you supporting that? Like almost like an app in your phone, right? And I think that's probably more the way things are going. But it doesn't seem like the market is going to support 40 soil sensor companies. Right? There's not that many golf courses, and lots of them get rain. So, it's also you have to pay attention to what the industry's doing.
Yeah. Well, from prior lives in the retail industry, when I had green retail decisions, it's like tech emerges, lots of players enter the market, and a bunch filter out, and there are a couple leaders that remaining. And I've seen it there. I've seen it in things like carbon management software and the corporate sustainability space. And I think that's happening now here. Is there like one or two technologies on the horizon that you're excited about kind of testing and getting into next?
Oh, robotic mowers. I mean, so if you look at the big three that we talk about in California, labor, equipment, and water, right? Those are the big three expenses in your operation. And I can tell you that most superintendents that water's primary, labor's the next. And if you're going to start to make big equipment purchases within the next 5 years, you should be looking at what robotic companies are out there. But again, it's early, right? I mean, we've been hearing from John Deere, and we've been hearing from Toro about these autonomous mowers that are coming. But there are some smaller companies out there that have them ready to go to market. We demoed a Firefly fully electric robotic fairway mower that they utilized on sod farms for years. So there's more players in the market. For that type of stuff, a standard fairway mower is generally going to be John Deere or Toro, because they also have the support network for it. They have the dealership network. They have the dominance in the market. So, but if you're talking about going with a small robotics company to do something completely different, and that's a bit of a risk and all, but that's the way it's going, to give you a bit more control of your labor. And I don't think I know one superintendent that says, I'm going to lay off a bunch of guys once I get robotic mowers. They're just not. Like even we have the small robotic mowers from Husqvarna. We have a 5-hole short course that has some steep elevation changes. So we're getting a lot of mower damage using bigger mowers in those areas. And then we were push mowing it. It's a couple of acres, but it's push mowing a par 3 that didn't last very long. And then we introduced these other mowers, and all of the rough on that little 5-hole par 3 is mowed with these little mowers, and we just don't send people there to do that. So it's and we don't miss it. It's not anything that we didn't lay anybody off. We just repurposed it all. And now, I mean, sure, some people, that's the difference between some golf courses staying open or not, but there's still a cost to your machine. right? But it is an operating cost that could keep a small local golf course open for its town, other than having 5 people, and trying to keep up with it, or so some of this, the technologies that are out there are certainly going to change it, make it some viable, and some even better. And when I talk about these things, and when we talk about this at Hillcrest, and when you're talking about wages and you're talking about labor, I mean, when you don't want to lay anybody off because you're providing jobs, and especially a place like this, there's some people who've been here for a very long time, and the members have personal relationships, and they don't, we don't want to lay anybody off. And I assure them that, believe me, we're not going to lay anybody off. But also, like, then you think about how do you really kind of all encompassing on the sustainability. Then you're talking about living wages. Then you're talking about how do you not only have a sustainable environmental and economics, but your labor force, and especially in the last 5 years, I think we all know how delicate that can be. How do you keep that consistent? How do you pay enough and keep it economically sustainable to keep your core people, get the basics of the golf course, the mowing and those types of things done, so you can have a little bit more predictable work environment?
Yeah. Well, listen, you are so jazzed about technology and its impact on the industry. This has been awesome. And we really could go on and on with this, but I know we've got like 2 or 3 more minutes before I need to let you go to get on to other things. And speaking of inspiration, I guess I'd like to move on to, a couple of personal questions if we
Sure.
can, to
Absolutely
give our audience a chance to get to know you a little better. What drives you, Matt?
Boy, that's an interesting question. What drives me in the subject of this type of stuff, I just find it interesting. I find it to the innovative aspect of it, of the technologies in the business. I find it very, very interesting to be in this business at this time. And some of that inspiration comes from when I lived in San Francisco in the Bay Area, in the era that I did, where you were seeing, that was when social media just started taking off, and you had Amazon go crazy. Apple was blowing up, the iPhone, all of that was happening in the Bay Area at that time. So when you're watching innovation happen and you're watching its influence in the area and globally, that sparked my interest. That was the driving factor. It's like, well, where's that in golf? And it is pretty much non-existent at the time, right? Nobody saw the iPhone coming, but in that respect, when it's now, I was been out of the Bay Area. I mean, I moved to San Francisco, so we're looking at 15 years ago. Now it's hitting golf, which is probably about the lead time for golf to get a level of innovation. To have watched that and kind of been a little bit on the outside of it, and now that it's hitting our industry, I want to be in the middle of it, and watching as these things come to fruition, come and change the game, change the whole position of director of agronomy or superintendent is becoming so technical and so much deeper. There's a lot more responsibilities, as we always say, and it's only gotten more and more responsibilities, but there's also a lot of a challenge of labor and water that is kind of unprecedented at this time than it has in the past. So all of this is answering a lot of these issues that we have, that we come across, and can really offer genuine solutions. So I think it's really just an innovative and a great time to be in this industry. And a lot of people are playing golf again, right? So it's also a fun thing to be a part of.
Well, you're clearly an innovator. You're very energetic, and you're kind of a pioneer. I like the way you enjoy doing things that haven't been done before and kind of blazing new trails. So my sense is we need more people like Matt Muhlenbruch in the Director of Agronomy position across the country. So thank you so much for being with me today on the Golf Sustainability Podcast.
Well, I appreciate it, John. And I had a great time. And also, I have a very supportive membership that is gung ho with all of this. So that helps as well. Yeah.
That's very cool. Well, I hope to get out to the West Coast and maybe visit you at some point.
Absolutely. It'd be great to have you.
Okay. Thanks very much.
All right, John. Thank you.
And to our listeners, thanks for participating and joining us on this episode. Please join us in future episodes of the podcast and tell your friends and colleagues about us. If you enjoyed it, give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcast. And we hope to see you on the next episode of the Golf Sustainability Podcast. Bye-bye.